listening to the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Erin.
I'm Bree.
And I'm Rachel.
Today, we have a bit of a partially snarky, partially serious episode because it's Bree's day to talk about something that is very near and dear to many of our hearts, and that is being a semwife. So
we should probably start by defining what a semwife is.
Yes,
fair enough.
Be, helpful probably for those of us. Well, I've been one, but for those who haven't been one.
So, semwife is a slang term, pretty much used in Lutheran circles to describe women whose husbands/fiancés are seminarians. They attend one of the Concordia seminaries in the United States.
And St. Catherine's. And Edmonton. There's Canadians. And anyway, sorry. Shout out to Canada.
Yeah. Yes, Canada. Shout out to America's hat. The reason that this is sort of a tongue-in-cheek approach to talking about semwives and conduct and ways to act, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek because there's really no way to be the perfect semwife. As much as we may want to mold ourselves to someone else's expectations of us.
I totally get what you're driving at, Bree, because as a former semwife myself, you can say there's no way to be a perfect semwife, but every single one of us is going to try because we're so excited for our husbands to be going down this path toward holy ministry. And so, let's be honest, anxious that we are going to screw it up. And we want to do everything we can to support him in his journey. And so it leads to a little bit of neuroses now and again about being that perfect semwife.
Right.
And so I'm glad that we're discussing this because I imagine there are people going through it right now.
Including me. So I will say this, as part of me is sort of terrified because maybe this hasn't been made clear. Hopefully it has. But I'm sort of a wild card when it comes to living my life. And so I don't necessarily like ascribe to things and behaviors and characteristics that many people who appreciate tradition, let's call it that, many people who appreciate tradition and a certain level of decorum really appreciate. So we're in our second year. Matt starts classes on the 31st of August. And thus far, it's been okay. So I have some tips and pointers today for any women out there whose husband is considering the pastoral ministry. This is also dedicated to all of the current wives of husbands attending Concordia seminaries, and hopefully we can shed a little light on how things are now, and maybe pastors' wives who had potentially different experiences can look ahead and see, okay, this is maybe how things have changed. Maybe things are the same. In any case, I would be very interested in hearing from the Sem wives and the pastors' wives in our Facebook group. So would love to hear comments, experiences, insight. I personally took some insight from women in my Wives of Concordia Seminary Facebook group. So I'll be sharing some tidbits of wisdom here and there for the rest of the episode.
Even if you're not a pastor's wife or a semwife, this is for you because there is not a single woman in the church who does not have a vested interest in supporting pastors, future pastors, and their families, and understanding how your actions and expectations shape their lives.
Amen.
So do not turn this off, even if you don't fall into one of those categories, because this is for you too.
So to give you a little bit of background, my husband and I graduated from Concordia, Chicago in 2008 He graduated from the pre-sem program. It was his intention to enroll in seminary immediately out of college, and ended up attending St. Louis his first year. Ultimately, we were not ready. We were not ready for the rigors of seminary. We were not ready for the rigors of ministry. We had sort of this cloistered opinion of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We thought that maybe the things that we didn't agree with in the church, we could bring a revolution to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We were gonna make deep changes. We were gonna drain the swamp. Whatever. Like, we were gonna be the unsung folk heroes of the LCMS. That ain't the case, fam. Like, let me just be honest with you. So, rule number 1, or tip number 1, remember, when your husband attends seminary, it's not about you.
Amen, sister.
You. It's not about him. It's not even about him. It's about using the gifts that God has given him to answer the call, to share the gospel, forgive people of their sins, distribute the sacraments, etc. And you know who does that work? All of it? It ain't him. Like, he's the conduit for that, but it's not him who does the work. When my husband was writing his sermons this year for his homiletics class, leading up, probably 2 weeks leading up to his giving his first sermon at our fieldwork church, like, he just layered all of this anxiety upon himself. It was just heaps of anxiety and wanting to do well and not being afraid to, like, he didn't want to be afraid to mess up. And for that probably week leading up to it, sort of sensing his anxiety and seeing it sort of permeate his life, we sort of came up with this coping mechanism of, I would ask him, who's doing the work? And he said, Jesus. And so that was kind of our, like, call and response thing when he was feeling stressed out by this, is that it's not on him. Like, yes, he needs to be formed and cared for as a pastor, but at the end of the day, he's a messenger. And for that reason, for him to feel like it's about him and he needs to act a certain way or pursue perfection is not that's not the objective that you should not be attending seminary to make waves in your synod. That's not why you should be doing this. So really, like, take a moment to assess that. I think when your husband's considering the ministry, know why you're doing it and make sure you're doing it for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
In a related vein is sort of my next tip here is to be humble. I'm not going to go into the reasons of why my husband left after his attendance in 2008, 2009. But a lot of it had to do with the pride that we were dealing with, and we were not ready to swallow that pride. But a lot of the struggle of him deciding to leave came from this inability for us to mature and to sort of submit and allow God to form us. So, yeah, I mean, be humble, acknowledge who you are in this whole picture. One of the excerpts, one of the pieces of feedback that I got from the Concordia Seminary Wives Facebook group came from Johanna. She said, being a semwife means you see a lot of different churches and you see them with fresh eyes like a visitor, but you often see the behind the scenes as well. For a church body that has so much in common, it's amazing how unique each congregation is and how diverse your experiences will be as you travel around. It's truly fascinating. when I'm tempted to think, wow, these people are strange, or yeah, I wouldn't do it that way, and think too highly of myself, I remember that I am just one member of the body of Christ, and they are members too. The eye is pretty different from the ear, but the eye isn't any better than the ear. We all have different gifts, we all have different functions, and we all work together toward a common goal. We suffer together, we rejoice together, and we will have an eternity together to get used to each other's idiosyncrasies. Um, a lot of wisdom there. Just to acknowledge that you are who you are. Don't try to be someone you're not, and allow yourself to take some direction from the people who know what they're doing.
On the flip side of that, not being a seminary wife or a pastor's wife, but having a pastor and also having friends who are sem wives, that is something for congregation members to realize and understand too. If you've had a pastor in your congregation for 5 or 10 years, you're used to doing things a certain way, and then you either get a new pastor or you get a field worker or you have a vicar, and they do things slightly differently. They don't preach the same way. They don't interact the same way during Bible study. That's probably okay, unless they're preaching heresy, which is a problem.
Yeah.
You get to know the person as a person, and you treat them as a fellow brother and sister in Christ, and that's super duper duper important. That we as congregation members also have to be humble about ourselves and where we're coming from too.
And you also, I think, the reason for this lack of humility that can be a problem, in the lives of not only seminarians, but also church leaders, it often comes from a good place, a place of idealism, where you have this vision for what things could be, and you want to make it so. And what that means is that you're willing to trample on people to put that vision into practice. And so that even the nobler forms of that idealism, sometimes you have to just put the brakes on that and say, go back to point number 1. It's not about me. I am here to sit at the feet of the apostles during this time and learn all I can, because I'll tell you what, you're going to need it. You're going to need there is not a single class in seminary that isn't there for a reason. And you're going to need every hour of field work, every bit of supervision and mentorship you can get your hands on. Don't take any of it for granted, and, be ready for just putting your own agenda aside while you're learning.
Absolutely. I think another important quality to have as a seminary wife, and a pastor's wife too, I'm sure, is allowing flexibility to shape your resilience in your role as a sem wife or a pastor's wife. I mean, you're looking at, from a traditional route perspective, 4 years of your husband being instructed, one of those years being just a full immersion of field work and vicarage. So for me, I'm terrified that like a year from now we may be moving across the country only to come back a year later. So there's a lot of transitions, not only in that third year, but just in general. I've heard stories from women who, I mean, they've put their lives on hold basically so that their husband can go to school and be formed as a pastor and enter the ministry, which is absolutely a noble thing. And yes, something that, we sign up for when we take our marriage vows is we're gonna support and love our husbands. So in that vein, like any sort of like extreme rigidity you have about how you're going to live your life is probably not going to be the best thing for you to have. Sherry, who her husband's actually a 4th-year field worker at Matt's residential fieldwork church, says this: in reality, the sem wife experience is a whole mix of emotions filled with blessings, but also a lot of stress, sadness and happiness, excitement, joy, nervousness, apprehension, and a whole lot of spiritual warfare. That sounds like the fruits of the spirit from hell, honestly. That's really. Uh, I feel so. She continues. I feel it is a constant state of transition and a whole lot of learning. You learn to be grateful in small things, whether it's an extra $25 or a box of food, small living spaces. We get used to the art of saying goodbye. With those goodbyes comes pretty fun places to vacation, and you really learn to rely on God. I cannot stress enough. It seems it seems trite, it seems empty, it seems meaningless to say, but even through this first year of seminary and going into the second year as apprehensive as we continue to be, God's faithfulness continues to present itself perpetually throughout our lives. The people of our congregation are amazing. They are tremendous supporters of Matt's schooling and work, whether it's someone just praying for us on a routine basis or giving us words of encouragement. We do have some congregants who help us out financially. And so, you know, the people of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod are some of they love their pastors. Like, it's evident. Just as an anecdote, someone walked up to my husband when he was working on campus one day last year and handed him a check for $100. Like, that's the kind of just crazy unconditional love that people feel for seminarians and their pastors, and that part of the experience is just so encouraging, and I love that. I love that people are willing to just write a check and like hand it to someone they don't like. That's awesome. The love that you would have for someone to do that is just it's beyond comprehension for me personally. So yeah, I mean, there are experiences where you really learn to rely on God, because when you have an unexpected medical bill or your car breaks down or whatever, and then you get a $50 grocery gift card in the mail that week, it's like, wow, like this is not a coincidence, people.
And it really does make a difference. I mean, we have never been, I think it's safe to say that we've never been poorer in our lives than financially than when we were in seminary. But we always had our needs met. And though we don't talk a lot about miracles as Lutherans, Garrison Keeler would probably have some ideas as to why that is. I'll bet you every woman who has put a family through seminary, if you take her aside and ask her, tell me about your miracles, that there will be moments that she can point to where everything looked like it wasn't going to work, and then God made a way. And it's just an amazing thing to look back on and see how he really does provide for the needs of his people through other people most of the time.
Vanessa, who is actually, her husband is in my husband's class, said this. She said, trust God in his calling for you. Take advantage of this wonderful opportunity at the seminary for both you and your husband to grow in your faith, trusting in this experience and humbling ourselves to him, it's so true. God's faithfulness shows itself again and again. And as important as humility and flexibility are in this role, something that I would also stress, so we're trying to strike this balance here of what it means not to be a perfect STEM wife, but like a good one, maybe, and a decent one, a passing one, is to know yourself and to be yourself. Remember who you are, remember whose you are, that your identity is not in, being the pickup organist or teaching Sunday school every week because that's the expectation that's been put on you. Your identity is in Christ. And so allow that to flow out from yourself and let that sort of inform how you want to get involved in church. The pastor at my husband's field, one of the pastors at my husband's fieldwork church, is constantly reminding me. He says, you're along for the ride, but I mean, you don't feel like you need to be involved in every single thing. And I think that, if nothing else, is one of the more important things that I would stress to lay people is the perfect SEM-wife doesn't exist. Like if you're interviewing a pastor and their wife doesn't play the organ. I know this is like a total straw man or organ man or straw organ or whatever. Don't be looking for superficialities like that. Allow the wife to be who she is. Outside of that ideal, she's going to have a lot of amazing qualities that, I mean, she's prayed with, loved, and supported her husband for the last 4 years of just constant change and, financial crisis in some cases. So there's got to be something to say for that at the very least, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It varies from woman to woman. I mean, I've met women who, both in seminary and in the ministry, who I'm pretty sure dream nightly about ironing clerical shirts, or who can't imagine a committee meeting happening at church that they weren't there to take notes for. And that's fine. That's great. Yeah. Pastor's wife, SEM-wife, is something that they perceive as its own calling, actually.
Yeah.
But then I know lots of women who just happen to fall in love with a man who had a calling to be a pastor.
Right.
And these are the women who are married to pastors. And they may or may not have a whole lot of interest in volunteering for this, that, and the other thing at church. They may have their own careers. They may have their own interests. But one thing they do share is, a passionate love for Christ and for his church, and a deep and abiding love for their husbands, and a desire to support them in that work. And I'll tell you the truth, I have been both of those women. And I go back and forth.
Dare I ask which one you prefer? Which one do you favor?
Let's just say I found greater peace when I told him to let the altar guild iron his vestments.
Yes! Good answer.
They love ironing.
I don't know how to iron.
Of course, now he's got to iron his own uniforms because, allow flexibility to shape your resilience and all that.
Yeah, make it work, Ken.
You may find yourself enjoying some very interesting transitions in your life. And that's okay.
Being on a boat for however long. Yikes.
Is it fair to say that one of the hardest things about being a pastor's wife / SEM-wife is living up to, or trying not to live up to, other people's expectations of what you're supposed to be?
Well, I think, honestly, from my experience, those expectations live in your mind as much as they live in anybody else's. Occasionally, you'll meet somebody who obviously has those expectations. I remember, though, when I was coming through seminary with Ken, that we used to joke about the SEM-wife haircut. Is that still a thing, Brie?
I don't know what that is, and
okay, well, there was
I
one
don't think
haircut.
I have it with my little side cut and my undercut. No, sorry. Really funny story. Just really quickly. I think this is hilarious. This is our experience in a nutshell. Is I decided to dye my hair purple. I threw caution to the wind against my better judgment. So I went to the salon on a Friday, and I'm like, make it purple, make it an Easter egg. And she did. And then as I was driving home, I was horrified because I had realized that Matt and I had our district interview the next day. So we're sitting across the table from Pastor Kevin Golden and Laura Mars with this vibrant purple hair, trying to talk about why my husband has a fitness for being a pastor in the LCMS. So needless to say, that is not the SEM-wife haircut I think that you're probably referring to. Yes,
no, it's not. And you know what? I never got that haircut either, because I knew You said know yourself. I knew myself. I knew that haircut didn't suit me and wouldn't suit me, and so I never bothered.
I'm gonna
And
mix patterns until the day I die. Like I
I
don't.
know. And that purple hair looked really, really
It
cool.
ruled. It ruled. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But even so, like you hear stories. This guy said that, make sure you know which of your slacks are the blue slacks and which of your slacks are the black slacks. So, like, sew a little thread on the inside that you can tell it's really blue. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, bro, who the heck cares? And he said, someone in my congregation gave me a hard time because I was wearing blue pants and a black jacket or some crazy nut. So again, it's like living up to these expectations where it's like, okay, is this what really matters? Is this what you're really looking for in a pastor or their wife? Is do they coordinate? Do they dress well? Do they
Yeah.
have a certain haircut? Like let's
Does
stop
he
thinking about that maybe.
does
I don't
he
know.
drive a used four-door sedan in a neutral color, and does she drive a minivan? With uh, yeah. Do they manage to dress really nicely, but you can tell all their things were acquired at the thrift shop?
Do they
It's
have kids? Does she
Mhm.
work? What does she do? Is she a teacher? Like I will
Yeah.
say this, like especially in my class, I've met quite a few women who are moms, but they're also working moms. They have far less quote unquote traditional roles. There's a physical therapist that I know. Just there's a nurse. So I think there's a lot more. I feel like there's a lot more diversity in our seminaries now, and there's something about that I think that's really refreshing, and I think it shows that you don't have to fit a certain mold, you don't have to have a certain job or look a certain way to succeed and to have a fulfilling ministry and lead a parish.
You're very right, Bree, in that if what we're asking of our pastors and their wives, of our seminarians and their wives, is anything other than, will you faithfully give me Jesus? If we're expecting them to dress a certain way, act a certain way, and we care more about that than we care about whether or not they are giving the gospel and living the gospel among us, then maybe we need to reevaluate. Are we creating an idol out of this perfect pastor image, this perfect semwife idea? It's a good question to ask.
Profound.
So here's my question for you guys. I'm hearing this, and my church has gone through the call process before, and like we were curious about the wife of the candidates we were considering, but to my knowledge, they didn't play any factor in any decision making. Do you feel that churches are actually, that it's a common thing for churches to be making decisions based off of the wife?
So first of all, I don't know because I've heard stories, I've heard accounts. We obviously are not in a position to interview for a parishioner's call at this point.
Right.
But I think a lot of it is, like Rachel said, a lot of it is like mental. A lot of it is like psychological. You hear these stories and you gather them up, and it is such a important thing for someone to be entering the ministry that you don't want to do anything to ruin that. Now, of course, in terms of like interviews and calls and stuff, I don't know. Truthfully, at the end of the day, maybe it doesn't matter. When it becomes a problem, I think, and maybe Rachel can speak to this, is once you're out in a parish with your husband, what do you do when the congregation sort of sees you as a proxy to communicate to your husband, for example?
Oh,
Um,
yeah, that's tough. To answer your question a little bit, I'm not aware of good numbers in our synod, but I know that in the broader ecclesiastical community in the United States, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of congregations having certain expectations of that the pastor will be married. In some cases, they want the wife not to work so that they can kind of get a 2-for-1 deal, hoping that she'll volunteer in a lot of many and varied ways. In some cases, again, anecdotally, there's an expectation that the wife will have a career so that maybe she can help with those insurance costs or whatever. That's anecdotal. What I think there are statistics on, and I wish I had looked this up beforehand, is that churches are less likely to call a single pastor because there is a perception that the wife adds something significant to the equation. So that's where there is some statistical. Now, I don't know if that is, caused by the fact that people look at a single pastor and go, what's wrong with him?
Oh.
Why wouldn't anyone want to marry him? But I suspect it actually has more to do with the latter, the idea that a pastor's wife really does add something special to the congregation that she's a part of. But with that, of course, comes expectations.
Yeah, I think it's just a general stereotype that, a pastor's wife is going to be a teacher or the church secretary or direct the choir or all of these just like typical auxiliary roles that happen in a church, when none of that is actually true or maybe even good or even remotely close to her skill set. And being able to take people as they are with their own skill sets and what they actually want to do in the church is really important. And a lot of us probably need a gut check with that if we're being honest with ourselves.
Yeah. I think especially these days, like, and this goes to my next point is love your pastor, pray for your pastor. And if he's married, love your pastor's wife and pray for your pastor's wife too. I think there's kind of a significant split right now in terms of in-person worship and mask wearing and, the coronavirus, from what I've heard, has brought out the ugliness of congregations, of church councils, of lay membership. So if you're hearing this right now, you know who you are. I don't know who you are, but don't be mean to your pastor. Don't be mean to your pastor's wife. Don't harass them. Don't threaten them. Have some empathy, for Pete's sake. Like, we're all building this boat downstream. Like, just why don't you be flexible for once?
Now, Bree, you know that all these people that you're talking to are not actually our listeners, because our listeners and our ladies are just lovely.
That's true.
I know that they love their pastors, but I agree there are people out there who can be problematic.
And that, honestly, that's a frank discussion that Matt and I have to have on a daily basis is like, okay, you're going to be dealing with people. You're probably going to be dealing with some difficult personalities. Let's be prepared for that. And if we don't end up encountering any of that in our ministry, like, let's treat that like a pleasant surprise. Like, let's be good with it. But yeah, I mean, don't be mean. Just period. Don't be mean.
Your pastor and your pastor's wife are people too. Like,
that's right.
You don't put them up on a pedestal because they aren't perfect.
We
just
fall
like
right
none of us
off
are
those
perfect.
things.
Which means they both need our prayers. They both need our love, and lots of it. You're right, Bree. I've heard some stories from pastors and pastors' wives. The last few months have just been brutal.
Yeah,
really, really brutal.
Absolutely.
And anything you can do to show your pastor and your pastor's wife a little love, I'm sure they would appreciate.
So, as much as I admonish you all to pray for and love your pastors, I think it's absolutely vital then in my relationship with Matt, it is absolutely critical that I am constantly praying for him, praying for his ministry, and loving him. Jessica in the Facebook group that I'm in for the women of Concordia Seminary, I think really hit it home. She said that in her husband's fieldwork experience, I believe is what she's referring to, is this. She said, the wife of my head pastor took a huge burden off my shoulders by telling me to stop worrying about it. She said, your only responsibility as the wife of the pastor is to be the parishioner that loves the pastor the most. That set me free to stop worrying about expectations and start to just live the reality that God has called us to. So I think at the end of the day, if you're going to focus, if you're going to prioritize any of the things that we've talked about today, definitely like be there for your husband. Pray for him constantly. If there is a formula, if there's a biblical formula for any of this, I would point you to 1 Thessalonians 5 verses 16 through 17, which is the rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and in everything give thanks, because that's God's will for us. So that's a passage that I keep in my back pocket as well when I think about my role as a SEM wife. Of course, beyond that, there are ways for you to keep your marriage in check, keep it healthy. I am a significant proponent of marital counseling. My husband and I are in therapy, not necessarily because there's trouble in paradise. You want to be able to relate to each other and maintain a healthy relationship, and going to counseling on a routine basis and normalizing that has been a tremendous task for us. It certainly is very helpful to do that kind of thing with your spouse.
Is that something that the seminary encourages students to do, or is that something that's it's your own? I know that you feel really strongly about it and really advocate for it. Is that something that seminaries encourage their students and the families that are enrolled there to participate in, or is that more you speaking from your own experience?
I don't know if they emphasize that. I believe there are counseling services on campus. I think there's a campus chaplain, at least in St. Louis, I'm aware. There is a greater emphasis, I think, on like mental and relational health for pastors. I think, and their families. I think there have been great strides in that in the last 10 years. I think certainly with Matt starting to attend now, 10 years later, it feels a lot different. It's more relational, I think, and more emphasis is put on, okay, yes, you're a student here and we will support you in that, but if that means you're going to be pulling a 2.8 GPA because you have to give your family some extra attention this semester, I would rather that be the case than your relationship to be in shambles. So even if it's not like blatantly encouraged, I have to believe that they would endorse that kind of activity.
I know that when we were coming through, it was not, there was more stigma than there ought to have been. There, I think, was a fear that if you as a pastor in training, a seminarian, were to admit vulnerability with regards to your mental health, that it could have adverse effects on your future vocation. And so that was a struggle. The other struggle is that so many of the services that are available are for the seminarian, and that there may not be the same range of services available to the seminarian's wife or to, other members of their family. But as Bria said, our church has made such great strides in undoing the stigma of mental illness and mental health, treatment. And I hope that we continue that work, because I think it is so valuable to just take advantage of that and come out of seminary, hopefully emotionally healthier than you went in, which is not always the case, if I'm honest.
Yep. There are a variety of ways that I think the board of admissions, maybe whoever sets up the programming, I think they've made strides in their business decisions to make sure that when kind of like Rachel was saying, when a seminarian graduates and receives his first call, he comes out better than he was emotionally, financially. I mean, that's huge. Just as an aside, my husband reapplied for seminary actually for the first time in 2015, and was his application was held at first. They were not going to accept him because of the massive amount of student loan debt that we had at that time. And their reasoning behind that, it was I have to respect that decision, because there was considerable problems where seminarians and their wives were graduating into the rigors of ministry with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt alone, not to mention credit cards, car payments, just general expenses for the family. And they didn't want that to rob the joy of ministry from them. And so there's been, I think, been a very significant shift in looking at the sort of holistic picture of the seminarian and his family as people, and how do we then treat these people? How do we then support these people so that when 4 years later they're ready to rock and roll?
Yeah, the church is definitely better off when in seminary, men and their families learn how to be well in the holistic sense that involves all of these things: financial, relational, mental health, physical health. I think that's one of the ones that we're starting to deal with now.
Yeah.
Is just all of the we're getting a grasp on some of these things, but there's a lot more that we can do as a church body to support men and their families through this. It's not, I mean, I haven't been there, so I don't know, but from all of you and all of my friends, it's not easy. And there's
Nope.
so many more things that we can do
Absolutely.
as a church body to support these families who do bring us Jesus on a weekly basis. It's so important.
Right.
It is extraordinarily stressful.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
on
totally.
It's blessed. Oh my goodness, it's good. It's a good place to be. Many times I think we wished we could have gone back and done it all over again. But at the same time, so extraordinarily stressful to have the academic rigors, the transitions, the taking the person who's often the breadwinner for the family out of circulation for 4 years. You know, there's so much stress involved in seminary, but it's such a blessed time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have given it up for the world. And
Yeah.
I wasn't even the primary recipient of it. I mean, like, I was just on the sidelines.
Right. Absolutely. So yeah, in closing, I guess I would say is keep your relationship with your husband primed. Keep your mental health in tip-top shape. Keep your fit. It's kind of like when we talked about during the body positivity episode, is take care of yourself, not just mentally, not just emotionally, but physically as well. I mean, part of it is diet, exercise, doing those things together as a couple, as a family, because I think if you were thrown sort of into a situation where it was not the ideal parish environment for you, you at least can rely on each other and have sort of this strong partnership together. And that's sort of how you get through it, is you have each other, and if nothing else, you got to make that work. I just want to give a shout out to Glenn Nielsen and to remind him that I'm very not excited about vicarage interviews coming up this year as a second year. But if we could get that Disney World chaplaincy program going, I would really love to spend vicarage year ministering out of Cinderella's castle. I would just really just wanted to throw that out there into podcast land.
Thanks, Bree.
You're welcome.
Oh, who are you kidding? You're going to Iowa like everyone else.
I'm going to reserve my reaction to that because, yes.
We love our pastors in Iowa. Anyway, seminary wives, pastors' wives in the Facebook group. We want to hear your experiences. We want to hear your advice for those of those ladies who are going through now. If you've experienced things and want to share what the piece of advice that you would have given yourself when you were a seminary wife, we would love to hear those stories in our Facebook group, the Lutheran Ladies Lounge. You can also find all of our podcast episodes at kfuo.org/Lutheran Ladies Lounge or on your favorite podcasting app. You're listening to the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Erin.
I'm Bree. Wait, no, I'm the perfect Sem wife. Funny.
I'm glad you are, because I sure ain't.
Views and opinions expressed on the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast may not represent the official position of the management or ownership of KFUO Radio, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The Lutheran Ladies Lounge is produced by KFUO Radio and available at kfuo.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Join our community on Facebook in the Lutheran Ladies Lounge.
With what we see of, I don't know. Now you go ahead. I don't even know where I'm going with it. I lost it.